help them make money off of their pages in other countries. And because we were building a very technology-intensive business, we could easily address those other markets as well. And so we expanded it there. Now, this is all credit to the team for being able to see that, understand it, take the chance, expand. And look, we were quite supportive as investors and not stopping them from going after this. So I think it is that team and our dynamic with them which makes a very big difference up front. Then you've got, are you in a space that's interesting and large? Is it worth it? You know, I think when we were talking the other day, you mentioned something to the effect of maybe GE only looks at companies that can be 100 million in scope. It's not dissimilar for us because we're going to be off by some factor. So if I'm playing in a very tight range and therefore the scope for being off is not large enough to make the business interesting enough, it doesn't make sense. And actually, ultimately, time is our most precious commodity. So if I'm going to spend my time doing something, I'd rather spend my time doing something big than doing something small. So that's maybe two. I'd say that does the business or product that you're articulating have some fundamental differentiation or not? If what you're doing is based solely on I can spend more money, or let's say in your case, we have the best brand so people will buy it from us. I don't think that makes sense. So I think, you know, these, you asked for three, I give you a stop at these three as sort of some of the high level ones that have to fit. I mean, as you go, there's a lot more that keeps coming out as you talk to people. You know, for us, that connection, that understanding, that ability to iterate. Not a single company we've invested in has gone per the plan we invested in. So some have worked better, some have worked worse. So it's how you iterate through that.
So if I were to say that your final call, how much is due to due diligence and analysis, and how does intuition play a role?
You know, I think that as it relates to the interactions with the team to navigate the stuff, that comes from the diligence process of spending time. So for example, that can't come from me looking at a resume. That can't come from me. And look, we invest in things as early as a business plan. So I have no P&L to look at. I have many times no product to look at. So it's a lot of how do we interact? How do I feel about who you are? How do we feel about how we may work together and evolve? How have you thought about your business? I mean, that I can diligence. How can I understand how you've actually dissected how you talk about your problem? Shop Clues, when they came to present to us the first time, they had more data set up and more metrics set up for a business that hadn't even than businesses I'd seen that were running. And it was shocking. And so he's got a blueprint for exactly what he needs to measure for this business. That can tell you a lot about how the person's going to operate. So I would say that you can be intuitive to an extent about the person, that you want to get as much information and diligence and time and energy spent on things that you can hopefully point to as factual feedback or signals in the interaction.
You know, the reason I asked you this question is because, you know, we have a lot of platforms called Horizon, Sprint, where a lot of new ideas, innovation, incubation takes place. Now, we also have an assessment where our own leadership team sits at the end, hears the idea and kind of, you know, absorbs them or thinks about it and assesses them. Is this a right model? Because this same leadership team has a legacy, have an inertia, they have the experience of all big brands have too. So it's the same team which analyzes and assesses these ideas and then, you know, in a way tries to put them back into their businesses. Because whatever disruptions we have seen, they have come from very unknown, very small, not related to those businesses at all.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be willing to fail, right? I mean, I think that your challenge in general probably tends to come, and rightfully so. Look, I give you the story of Sony Music. Who wanted to be the guy who gave away the candy store at Sony Music? You have a business that makes money tomorrow. Who wants to say that I killed it? Who wants to be the one that woke up tomorrow and say, yeah, I authorized a project that ended up killing this much of our revenue stream? You don't do it, someone else might do it. But better that someone else do it later than you be the one who's done it today. So, again, I don't work in a big company, so and probably for this reason. And so I find it challenging to figure out how to navigate that. So I have no real good way to tell you how to manage it. I can tell you though that for everybody else in the leadership side, that your issue will be that everybody else is willing to fail. If you're not, that's going to be problematic.
Sandeep, I have a question for you. Obviously, technology has been one of the biggest levers that you've used in disrupting most of the games of the big players. Technology is both available off the shelf as well as it can be customized to your requirement. In order to give a differentiated service, what has been the journey of most of these guys? Do they develop the software, the technology for that exact specific requirement, or they first buy out what is available in the market, fine-tune it, and then develop their own? For example, let's take the case of the new guys who are coming up to like snap deals. I mean, will they buy something which is directly available, or they need to develop technology for the specific differentiated services? That's number one. And number two, if we were to do that, would you recommend that we set up a core team which looks at this very differently, because that's going to be a big lever which is going to give you the advantage?
So I just mentioned that one of the things that I think is important is sustainable product differentiation. So if I were to look at let's say a technology distribution company for an e-commerce business, and if they were going to say, look, we're going to buy this product from X software business, and we're going to use this third-party logistics from this guy, and we're going to do this from that one and this from that one, my question would be, what are you adding value in? And if you don't have something you're adding value in, then tomorrow someone with more marketing dollars will win over you. Now, that being said, where you start and where you end are two different things. So you can start by buying things off the shelf, no problem. If you can articulate for me how that's going to look over time, you can tell me. So when we started ClearTrip early on, trust me, we made lots of mistakes again. We started ClearTrip early on, we took software off the shelf because we felt that travel search was commoditized. Enough people were doing this stuff, let's just take something off the shelf. We took it off the shelf and we ran with it for a while. And I would say within 6 months, we ripped it out and built our own. But it was enough to give us a comfort that we understood the market quickly and we saw what it is. So in your case as well, I mean, to me, I would take as much as you can off the shelf quickly to prototype and assess the market, and then really look at how can you build upon that to differentiate. And be willing to throw it away. We have in many companies, again, I'll say, thrown out what we started with. It's okay. It's not that you spend tons of money on this stuff. It's some software that you brought in. You say, okay, look, I got it. I understand where the market is. Now, if it could only do this, this, and this, and this, it's all right. Let's rebuild the thing in this way to do that. And so it's a continual process of that. Did I answer both the questions? I'm sorry.
The second part was in terms of, therefore, resourcing or skilling your manpower. You need to constantly add on that platform or in that area much heavily on, because that's going to be your key area which you're going to use for differentiation. Am I right? For example,
yeah,
people in software, or people in coding, or is that the direction most people go?
There's a general rule of thumb that for any startup, you get $1 million in valuation for every engineer, and you lose $1 million for every MBA. So with that in mind, I'd add that way.
Yeah. Sandeep, I have one question. Do you think this digital space also is getting commoditized? And let me give you an example. We spoke of Amazon and its valuation. But if you look at Amazon versus a Flipkart or a Snapdeal or eBay, practically they are peddling the same product offering. So in the long run, obviously there's going to be a shakeout in the market, and I think from 4 we come down to 3, 2, and 1. So do you think the way we are heading, the space is going to get more crowded, and there is more of devaluation which will happen? And in such a scenario, what would one do to ensure sustainability of the business model? Because this example which I gave you, these 4, exactly the product offering, the services, there is very little differentiation in terms of the value proposition to the consumer. So they will each outprice the other, and I think the market will just go down. But that's the kind of future which we see. Do you think differently?
Yeah, so I think that certain categories are very susceptible to that. So broad-based e-commerce, as we talked about those, Amazon, Flipkart, Snapdeal, that world is very driven by this idea that if I build this big enough, quickly enough, and get to scale, I will then get consumers coming back. I will leverage my customer acquisition costs. So they're not all just crazy in the sense that, I mean, they're not just out there to throw money away. The logic is that if this is going to be a $100 billion e-commerce market, and if I can capture 40% of that, I can do 40 billion in GMV. If I can do 40 billion in GMV, if I can be a 10% take rate on that, I can get 4 billion in revenue. If I can do 4 billion in revenue and I can have a certain repeat purchase rate, I can have a business that should have an operating margin of, let's say, 2 to 3%. So that becomes an interesting business. Now, if today the business and the market's at, let's say, 5 billion in revenue, 3 billion in revenue, 12 billion in revenue, it's okay. We're building for this because if I get there, look how great it's going to be. So that's what they're playing for. Now, that game is a high-stakes game. And it is one where you're saying, I'm going to put down 100 million, put down another 100 million, put down, because the end game is, if you look at any traditional valuation system, you would do a DCF, you would project forward 40 billion growing at 3% a year, 5% a year on a 2 to 5% operating margin business, create a terminal value and create a $100 billion, $200 billion valuation. So what's $1 billion today if I win that? Now, you have to be willing to play, it's high stakes poker. And so if the question was, aren't we going to see more people come into that game? I'd say no. Because there's not enough people with enough of a balance sheet or cash flow to be able to fund something like that. Which of these guys will succeed? I tend to think that the guy with the biggest checkbook will succeed over time. Because to your point, there's very little differentiation. That's very disheartening for me individually, even though I'm not invested in those businesses, because I would love to see that one of these guys leverage a deeper understanding of a domestic consumer and do something, but it just doesn't seem like they're there yet.
I have one question on, timing to an entry in a particular business segment is very important. Similar way, exit of a particular business is also very important. In your failed business, what is a strategy which you have adopted for exiting a business in terms of timing, in terms of emotions at that point of time? Do you wait for things to happen or you take a decision? On what is the basis of that decisions?
Yeah, so I guess exits can happen in multiple ways. The worst exit is that you have to shut down a business, right? It's an exit. And that's one. You can exit by, let's say, going public as a company. You can exit by selling your stake to another investor or someone acquiring the business. We've been through all of these. And the first one is always the worst, or the hardest. Meaning, not the first of these options, the first time you're faced with this. Even selling your stake in a business. We invested in a company called InfoEdge, which runs Naukri.com. It was a great relationship, and the CEO there and I got to be great friends, but we hit a point where, as a fund, my job is ultimately to return capital. So I had to sell. And we made a good return, and as I sold, I had to also step away from the business and go do other things. It's emotional to your point, it's hard, you get through it, you realize later that it's all right, we're still friends, life moves on, I still talk to him, it's all okay. First time you do it, it's okay. Second time, it's easier. Third time, even easier. The hardest ones are shutting it down. Shutting it down is never easy. But if you accept this idea, then you're going to have to deal with that. And so that's just more you've got to be strong and brave about it and be honest and transparent with everyone and do your best to help them find the best next thing to do. And I think you have to be humane about how you go about it and be careful. And plan for it, because it's an eventuality. So if you do these things well, I think it's magic. But it's kind of a reality of life.
Sandeep, I have a question. Here. You said India is...
you sound like you're here, you know.
Sorry. You said India is a fragmented market. Very true.
India is a, sorry?
Fragmented market. I think logistics is one of the biggest challenges. Now, if you have products which are small like mobile phones, it's far easier to manage. But if you have bulkier products like furniture, appliances, it poses a big problem, especially if you want to tap the hinterland. So you've been managing this furniture business, you said. So how have you gone about it?
I think, local acquisition, local disposition for a lot of things is how we think about stuff. So we have not built it as a national business, our furniture rental company. Even our reverse logistics business, Green Dust, where we sell things like refrigerators, washing machines, stuff like that that are refurbished, we do as much of it locally as possible. And so we'll buy it, source it locally, and sell it locally. For Lenco, the numbers I showed you there are largely just Bangalore. We've started in Bombay, but still Bombay's small. We started in Pune. Pune is very small. So we don't necessarily think that everything needs to be national on day zero. And nor do we think that it should be national even longer term. And so as you deal with these types of products, I think that's the only way we're solving for that right now, is trying to reduce that cost. Over time, perhaps with scale, we can look at things differently. But at this point, this is how we're considering.
That would necessarily mean that you're limiting the scope of the business. I mean, growing scale would be difficult.
You know, we were having this discussion the other day internally about, as we looked at Fasos. So Fasos is a food business. And if I compare it with a Tiny Owl and a Food Panda, or let's say in the US you had companies like Seamless and Grubhub, or even within our portfolio you have a company like Droom. Traditional software tech companies, you would hope at the early stages could double every quarter, and then over time double every half year, and then over time double every year, based on as they keep scaling up. If I looked at what Domino's did over the years and how they grew roughly at a steady 3% month-on-month growth. A company like Fasos had been trying and has been growing at about 8 to 9% month-on-month. Now, if you're a real-world business with real-world assets, at some point the wheels are going to fall off the car if you keep driving it at that speed. And so, to your point, I think that we're accepting that if I'm in a business like a Furlenco, that while I'm growing right now, and look, the base is small, but you're growing at 25% month-on-month, this could be problematic. And the only way I can manage that growth is if I'm not doing it in 10 different cities. And if I'm growing 25% month-on-month, I really don't have a scale or scope problem right now. So I think that we just need to think about things perhaps a little bit differently per model that we look at. If I'm building Imbibe as a test prep platform and I'm only able to do it in Bangalore, there's no logical reason for that. It's a platform. It should apply everywhere. If I'm building for Lenco, I can live with the scope being that. Okay, I think I have to get going. Are we cool?
I just wanted to
Sorry.
add some thoughts on this. I just wanted to ask you. One is, in terms of the successful digital companies, whether it's the Ubers of this world or the Amazons of the world, and I'm just comparing it with Godrej, having a legacy coveted brand does not matter. Am I right to conclude? Yeah. Absolutely. It just doesn't matter. And I think some people also kind of alluded to it. Does having a legacy brand, is it an asset, or it's really, it just does not matter? Does it add value, if I ever ask a question?
It can. And unfortunately, very few legacy brands have shown how to use it. I mean, they've been stuck, I think, in the legacy situation of it. Look, I started at the beginning by saying, I'm quite humbled from my side to be here because you guys have survived and have thrived over the years in different ways and have figured out how to do it. So I think that you've already demonstrated an understanding of how to do it. The question is just simply to say, all right, here's another new area. How do we move in that direction? So I think you've demonstrated an ability to do it. I think that this world just tends to move at a different pace. So therefore, if you can think in that manner and be willing to look in that direction, it can happen. I'll put it differently. Like I I was saying earlier as well, I don't think the brand will carry you forward. I think the willingness to build the right products, and I don't believe in the past as well, it's necessarily been just the brand that's carried it forward. You've had the right product for the right market at the right time, at the right price. I think that going forward, it's the same thing. It's just now, it may be a different set of skills and a different type of people to the point around, are they technologists? Do you need a team that does this stuff? Absolutely. And you may need to look at things a little bit differently.